Hey everybody, Sean from Media Assault here, and it's time once again for another entry into my Halloween horror series. Now when I originally kicked this off, I said I was only going to do 4 films, but I've enjoyed watching a lot of horror movies recently, so I decided to continue it, and I thought what I would do is, the first part were 4 films that I hadn't seen before. So I'm going to do 4 more films and recommend 4 films that I enjoy that maybe don't get a lot of exposure or maybe you haven't heard of. Basically just 4 films that I would recommend for Halloween or just generally good horror films. And I wanted to start that today with William Peter Blatty's Exorcist III Legion. And this is a movie that really is underrated and underestimated, I guess. It's kind of overlooked. It is a flawed movie. I'll say that right out of the gate. This is a movie that is burdened with the fact that it's a sequel to The Exorcist, which is basically considered one of the scariest, if not the scariest movie of all time. And a lot of people, as soon as they hear a sequel to The Exorcist, they think of Exorcist II, The Heretic, which was a terrible piece of crap, starring Richard Burton and Linda Blair. This does not feature Linda Blair at all. It does not have any connection to The Exorcist II. It doesn't build off of it. It's considered the true sequel to The Exorcist because it was written and directed by William Peter Blatty, the guy that originally came up with The Exorcist. That said, though, it isn't his original vision, and I'll get into that in just a second. But the movie does take place in Georgetown, just like the original Exorcist, and it does feature 3 of the same characters from The Exorcist. Lieutenant Kinderman, who here is played by George C. Scott, Father Dyer, who is played by Ed Flanders, and Jason Miller returns as Patient X, and he seems to bear more than a small resemblance to Father Damien Karras, one of the priests who did the exorcism from the first film. The plot revolves around a series of killings that happens in the Georgetown area that seem to have the same M.O. as a serial killer named the Gemini Killer, who was actually executed in the electric chair 15 years prior to these killings. So Lieutenant Kinderman is a little perplexed as how this can be happening. When Father Dyer gets murdered while he's inside a hospital, Kinderman locks down the hospital and begins investigating some of the patients there because he thinks there may be a connection between the patients and the murder. And he discovers this Patient X locked away inside the disturbed ward and notices his resemblance to Father Karras. While he starts interrogating him, Father Karras doesn't seem to know who Father Karras is, but he claims to be the Gemini Killer. And that's all I'm going to say about the plot. This movie is incredibly atmospheric. It's got a very claustrophobic feel to it. That adds to the creepiness of it. The movie is relatively slow paced. There's not a lot of action. So with the creepy atmosphere, and there's a lot of suspense, there's a lot of tension. When something happens, it seems to amplify the effect. So the scares here aren't many, but they're damn good ones. The only problem with The Exorcist III, and the thing that really keeps it from being an all-time classic movie that could rival The Exorcist, is the fact that it's been tampered with. The studio wanted some changes made after principal photography was done, and they required William Peter Blatty to tack on an ending, which throws in some elements from the first film, more so than there were originally there. And also, they demanded that a movie called The Exorcist, or linked to the Exorcist franchise, should include an exorcism. And these elements really are sort of like putting a square peg into a round hole. They just don't fit. The ending feels a little rushed and weird, and that really ruins the movie, or I shouldn't say it ruins the movie because that's very extreme, but it keeps it from being a classic horror movie. That said, though, it's still incredibly worth watching. I'll show you the back. There's George C. Scott. George C. Scott gives a really great performance in this film. It's not the best he's ever given, but it is certainly one of his, it's certainly one of the better things about the movie. His banter with the Father Dyer character, played by Ed Flanders at the beginning of the film, is just classic. It's hilarious. But the real highlight of Exorcist III is the performance of Brad Dourif as the Gemini killer. He delivers some monologues in some of the scenes that take place in the Disturbed ward, which are classic. And they are assisted by some excellent sound design. This movie just begs you to turn off the lights and crank up the sound. And if you have a surround sound system, this is a great movie to watch and use it because it's just phenomenal. It really heightens the atmosphere that much more. So if you can do that, do it, because this is great. Unfortunately, this movie is not available on Blu-ray. It is only available in this DVD, which was released back in 1999 and is still widely available, usually in the bargain bin. You can find this super cheap pretty much anywhere they sell DVDs. It's a regular visitor to the $5 bin at Walmart. I just looked, Amazon has it on sale for $5.49, I believe. So don't pass it off as crap because it's Exorcist III and because it's cheap. It's really good. It's just not as good as it could be. If I had to give it a rating, I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. And I really wish they would re-release the original version of it, or at least try to track down some of the original footage, and so we could get a re-released version with that footage, because it's not included on this DVD. Because I'd like to see what was left off, or what was the original ending, if that stuff is still available. I think that would be awesome. But as it is still worth watching. So check out The Exorcist III Legion, which is widely available on DVD pretty much anywhere. Thanks again for watching, everybody. As always, feel free to rate, comment, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. And take it easy.